All right. Hello and welcome everyone to our office hours webinar for BrainHQ. We're so glad that you are here and able to join us today. My name is Stephanie and I am a multimedia specialist here at Posit Science, the makers of BrainHQ. My co-host today is Dr. Henry Monka. Henry, when you're ready, you want to hop on and say hi?
Hey, folks. Hey, Stephanie. Thanks for hosting us today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here and glad to have you joining with me. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Dr. Henry Monka is a longtime runner of these webinars with me. But for those of you who haven't joined us in the webinar before, Henry earned his PhD in neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco, and that's where he studied brain plasticity with our co-founder, Dr. Michael Merzenich. He has been the CEO of Posit Science here since 2011. All right, so let's take a look at the agenda for today. So Henry is going to go ahead and give a brief presentation about memory, and then following that, we're going to run a poll to see which of the memory exercises you would like us to demonstrate for you. Now, there are a lot more of you in the audience than there are of us, so that means that we likely won't be able to answer every question that may come up, and we likely aren't going to be able to demo every exercise. So it's very important that when that poll comes up, you go ahead and submit your answers. If you have any questions about any of those exercises that we don't get an opportunity to answer, you can send any follow-up questions to our support team. They can be reached at support@brainhq.com. We also have a support site, which you can find at support.brainhq.com, that has answers to a lot of common questions, especially about the exercises. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say is that today's webinar is being recorded and it will get posted to our YouTube channel sometime next week. If you'd like to be notified when that video goes live, you can head on over to youtube.com/brainhq and subscribe there in order to receive a notification when that video goes up. You can also find all of our previous webinars there too. So if you want to see demos of other exercises, we would encourage you to go and watch those webinars as well. All right, so Henry, I'm going to go ahead and toss it to you for the presentation.
Okay, well, let's see if I can get my screen share going here.
Yep, there we go. Coming in
Okay,
great.
perfect. So I'm glad everyone came today. We're going to talk about memory. We're talking about training memory, and we're going to talk about the memory exercises in BrainHQ, exactly as Stephanie said. I'm going to really just give some brief comments at the beginning. We're going to try and spend as much of this time on this office hours today demoing exercises and taking your questions. But that being said, I thought it was useful to just set the stage with, hey, what do we mean by memory? And as I often do in these office hours, I'm going to turn back to William James, who is really the pioneer of modern psychology and cognitive science. Wrote a book called The Principles of Psychology in 1890, and talked about, in his view, that the art of remembering is the art of thinking. And what that tells us is our idea of memory is actually quite broad. It means a lot of things, and there's a lot of different kinds of memory, but memory is incredibly important to ourselves and our experience of the world and our sense of ourself. And so I want to talk about a couple different kinds of memory and how they work on the brain, just to kind of set the stage for how interesting and complex memory is. So I want to start off by talking about a kind of short-term memory. So short-term memory is absolutely just essential to our experience of the world. And I want to start off by talking about a kind of short-term memory called immediate memory. So let's say I say something to you, and let's say I say something to you on this webinar, and I say, hey, short-term memory is essential to our experience. Well, of course, I'm making sounds with my mouth and they turn into vibrations in the air, and somehow through the miracle of the internet, they're transported across the world to you, and you hear them and those sounds go into your ear. And even just you processing what I'm saying is a kind of memory, right? So when I say those words, even for you to follow that conversation, you have to have a little bit of short-term memory, which we call immediate memory, right? If you're going to understand the sequence of words and you're going to understand, hey, when I say essential, what am I talking about? Well, you need to have a little bit of short-term memory to know that I said that phrase and which words came beforehand and which ones came afterwards. So even just understanding the rhythm of speech and our immediate kind of consciousness and awareness of something that someone is saying requires a little bit of immediate memory. So where does immediate memory occur in the brain? Well, here's the brain. And, think about me saying something. When I say something, it comes into your ear as those vibrations in the air of sound waves. And, that's turned into electrical impulses in your neural system, and they're sent right up to here, your auditory cortex. And that's when your brain first kind of experiences and processes these sound. Well, it turns out that from the brain's perspective, perception and immediate memory are almost the same thing, right? Your ability to maintain that sense of what I'm saying with your immediate memory, it's pretty much a feature of just the earliest parts of your brain's information processing of sound. And the same thing's true for vision, too. If you see something, you're out in the world and maybe you see a butterfly or a tree, or I'm in a city, you see a car going by, that information is sent from your eye up into the earliest parts of your visual sensory cortex, and you're processing it there, you're starting to see it there, and you're also starting to just remember it ever so briefly there to give you some context of what's going on in the world. But let's go one step further. Not just our experience and perception, but what if we need to actually do something with that information? So another kind of short-term memory is called working memory. Let's say I say, hey, give us a call at 1-866-BRAIN-HQ, right? That phone number. You not only have to experience and perceive that, but you have to store that in what's called working memory so that you can walk over to the phone and then say back to yourself, oh yeah, he said 1-866-BRAIN-HQ. So that's called working memory. And the way that works, again, as I've said it, it goes into your brain. And this is about temporarily storing information so you can work with it. And you're usually not trying to store it for the long term. You're not trying to memorize that phone number. So 20 years later, you still know it, right? If you want to know that phone number 20 years later, you'll write it down or put it in your phone. But that kind of working memory is essential for us to just get things done in the world. We need to remember a phone number. We need to remember what someone tells us to get at the grocery store. We need to remember directions so that we can find our way from one place to another. So how does that kind of memory work? That kind of working memory? Well, again, if we think about our brain, here's our auditory sensory cortex where we stored memory for something we heard just immediately. It turns out that that information gets sent to the front of the brain, what we call frontal cortex, right up here behind your eyes. And that's kind of the seat of working memory. We have to engage that frontal part of our brain to store something and rehearse it and repeat it to ourselves in working memory. And the same thing is true for visual working memory as well. So information's flowing from the brain. We perceive it kind of in the back of the brain at the start. It's flowing to the front of the brain so we can store it in working memory and operate on it. Let's go one step further now. Let's talk about long-term memory. Well, if we're going to store something in long-term memory, like a childhood memory, right? Maybe you remember going to the beach with your family when you were a little kid and building sandcastles, right? That's not just sensory memory, and that's not working memory. That's really long-term memory. And one really important kind of long-term memory is called declarative memory. And you might think of that as knowing what. And what I mean by that is long-term declarative memory. These are memories of facts or experiences. These are memories that you can state or you can describe. Someone can say, hey, what's your best memory of your childhood? And you can say, oh, we had this wonderful summer vacation. We went to the beach with my family, and I remember building these sandcastles, and we dug in the sand, and the water washed over our feet, and it was so much fun with mom and dad. Right? Those are all me putting that memory into words. So we call that kind of a declarative memory. I can tell it to you, and then actually you could remember it after that because I've said it to you, right? So we think of it as you know what happened. So that kind of memory is incredibly important because it forms the basis for our history and our own sense of self, right? Our entire life's experiences in many ways are rolled up into these kinds of declarative memories. So where does that happen in the brain? Well, let's start with working memory. We've maybe put something temporarily in our working memory. And what happens is that information flows into this structure that's deep within the brain, right? We're viewing the brain from the side here, and deep inside the brain, there's this kind of almost semicircular shaped structure called the hippocampus. And we send information to the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is absolutely essential for the creation of memories. Everything that's going to get stored in your long-term memory has to pass through this part of the brain, the hippocampus, kind of to get processed and organized and be ready for storage. But one thing that's interesting is that's not actually where the memory is stored. right? The hippocampus processes these things we want to store for the long term, and then the hippocampus sends information all over the brain, and that's where it gets stored through brain plasticity. The hippocampus helps all these broad areas of the brain rewire themselves, and through that rewiring process, that's how we form that long-term memory. So the hippocampus is incredibly important for the creation of memories, but it's not where they're stored. They're stored very broadly across your brain. So one final kind of long-term memory that I want to talk about is a different kind. It's called procedural memory. You might think about this as knowing how. And of course, the classic example here is learning to ride a bike, right? If you learn to ride a bike, you might have practiced when you were a kid, or maybe you learned as an adult, and you couldn't do it at first, right? And someone could tell you the steps, right? Well, you have to balance and you have to pedal in a rhythmic way, and you got to lean a little bit when you turn. But just because they tell you those steps, you don't instantly know how to ride a bike. And that's different than that previous kind of long-term memory, right? If I tell you that Paris is the capital of France, pretty much immediately you know that Paris is the capital of France, as long as you can trust me, and you can. But if I tell you, well, the way to ride a bike is to get on it and balance and turn a little bit and lean when you turn, you might know that kind of as an idea, but when you get on the bike for the first time, you're going to fall off. So procedural memory is really different. You have to learn it through practice. And you can't actually just transfer the memory to another person by telling them what it is. Same thing is true for music. If you've ever learned to play the piano, right? Someone can tell you what the notes are, but you have to practice to learn. Or learning another language, like learning French, right? So all of these kinds of long-term memories, these are really long-term memories of what you might call skills or processes. And scientists call this procedural memory, or you might have even heard the term muscle memory, right? Muscle memory is not really in your muscles, it's in your brain, as it turns out. But what it means is memory for how you know how to do something, right? These are memories that cannot be stated in words. You've learned to do it by experience. And of course, these kinds of memories are also incredibly important for us because they form the basis of our abilities and the basis of everything we can do. So these kinds of procedural memories are actually also stored all across the brain in this very broad way, right? As you are practicing learning French, for example, or you're practicing learning to play the piano or learning to ride a bike, brain plasticity is rewiring all of your brain to turn it into a brain that has that skill. And in fact, there's a part of the brain down here at the bottom, and we almost never talk about it. It's not very fair, but there's a fascinating part of the brain down here, right kind of, behind your ears and close to your neck called the cerebellum. And this part of the brain ends up being incredibly important for the formation and storage, particularly of motor memories or muscle memories. As you're learning to ride that bike, or as you're learning to move your fingers to play the piano, your cerebellum is involved. So what I really want to convey from that is there's a lot of different kinds of memory. They're all really important to your experience, your sensation, your sense of yourself, and they all have to work together in order for you to, be effective in living in this world. But what happens when memory goes wrong? Well, there's a lot of cases in neurology and psychology of memory disorders, but I want to talk about two of them in particular because they really highlight what we're talking about here today. The first thing I want to talk about is amnesia. And, what amnesia really means is you have, lost a period of time where you're able to create new memories. And sometimes people have the wrong idea about amnesia. It's not so common to have amnesia from a long time ago, right? It's uncommon to have something happen to your brain and all of a sudden you've forgotten your childhood. Mostly what happens with amnesia is something happens to your brain and that interrupts the process of creating new long-term declarative memories, right? So this guy we're looking at here, this is a very famous neurological patient. And for a long time, he was just known by his initials, HM, sort of to preserve his privacy. And what happened with HM is quite some time ago, really, I think back in the 40s. He was suffering from epilepsy, uncontrollable seizures. And his neurologist decided the way to treat this was actually to remove his hippocampus, that part of the brain that we talked about that's involved in the formation of long-term memories. Now, they didn't exactly know what the hippocampus did back then, and they knew he had terrible seizures, so they went ahead and with surgery, removed that part of his brain. And I guess the good news is it worked. It stopped him from having terrible seizures. But quite dramatically, he became incapable of forming new long-term memories. Every day when he woke up, he thought it was the same day, kind of right before his surgery, so to speak. And he never regained that ability because he never had a replacement hippocampus, I guess you could say. And you can imagine what a strange and peculiar life that might be for the next 20 or 30, 40 years of your life to wake up and think, well, it's the same day back in 1940s. And of course, you're looking in the mirror and you're getting older and you're meeting people who say they know you. It's a tragic, tough, terrible existence. And of course, he had to be institutionalized, had to have a lot of help leading his life. And really what that showed us is how important the hippocampus is. Because he didn't have a hippocampus anymore, he could not create new long-term memories. So the same thing is true if you think about someone who might have had a head injury and has a temporary loss of consciousness, and maybe they just can't remember what happened when they, got hit on the football field, or maybe they're a soldier in a war. They can't remember what happened when that bomb went off. Well, that's because they had a sort of a short-term shock to their hippocampus, and that interrupted the creation of new memories. They can still remember things from a long time ago, but for a period around that shock to the brain, no new memories could be formed. But then afterwards, with some recovery, that person can start forming new memories again, but they just have a gap in their experience because of that temporary damage to the hippocampus. And of course, the other sort of very significant memory disorder that we often think about is Alzheimer's disease. And of course, we think of Alzheimer's disease as a disorder of memory, and it's absolutely true. The earliest signs of Alzheimer's disease tend to be starting to be a loss of memory. But over time, as Alzheimer's advances, a person loses other cognitive functions as well, like attention or the ability to interact socially or the ability to even take care of themselves. And so we have to take care of them. And so what's going on there? Well, what's happening in Alzheimer's disease is the whole brain is starting to kind of unbuild itself, right? On the left, this is an image of a healthy brain. And on the right, this is a person who has advanced Alzheimer's disease where they can't take care of themselves anymore. And of course, as soon as you look at this brain, you can understand perhaps why memory is not working well and why a person's having a harder time taking care of themselves. There's simply a lot less of the brain because it's undergoing this degenerative neurological condition. And again, the reason I bring that up is because, it's important to understand that, the storage of memory is not just a single place in your brain, right? You shouldn't think of your brain as like having a safe and that's where all the memories get put. Memory is an experience across your entire brain. And of course, then as the entire brain starts to degenerate with Alzheimer's disease, that's why we see such significant memory and thinking and other functional problems. So I'm going to stop there because what I want to now talk about and what we're going to do with Stephanie is, hey, let's talk about what we can do to train our brains in order to maintain our memory and cognitive function. And there are a lot of memory training exercises in BrainHQ, and we are going to talk about and demo them. Stephanie's going to introduce this poll in a minute. Well, why don't we do the poll, and then I'll say one more thing about training your memory after we give people a chance to do this poll. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Sure thing. So you should all be seeing a poll pop up on your screen and maybe a separate window. All of the exercises are listed as individual questions, and we want you all to rate from a scale of 1 to 7, because there are 7 different exercises here, how how important it is for us to demo that specific exercise for you today. So say you are a whiz at syllable stacks, maybe put that down as a 1. It's not very important for us to cover that for you today. But say something like rhythm recall, you're having a hard time understanding it, you want a live demo, go ahead and mark that as a 7 on this poll. So it looks like we already have some responses coming in, which is great. There are a lot of questions there. You may need to scroll down to see all of the exercises listed. And we're going to let that run for a minute. Henry, did you want to continue that thought while the answers are coming in?
Yeah, so today, of course, we're specifically talking about the 7 memory exercises in BrainHQ. But one thing I want to emphasize is that if you want to sharpen your memory, if you want to build a stronger memory, a more resilient memory, it's incredibly important to also train your speed and attention. And you know, when we built BrainHQ, right, there are dozens of exercises in BrainHQ. We had to categorize them in order to, you know, just kind of show people what they were. And so, you know, one of the categories, of course, is memory. But I would never want anyone to think that they should only do the memory exercises if they're worried about memory. I hope that based on what we just went through in these slides, you know, what you can now see is that, hey, memory involves the whole brain, right? And if your brain is operating slowly, right, well, that information's going to have a hard time hopping from one station to the next in your brain. And so you might have challenges with memory. If your attention is not working so well, you can't remember anything unless you pay attention to it. So attention is incredibly important. And on the clinical trials that we've done showing that BrainHQ training improves memory, all of those clinical trials were a mix of speed training and attention training and memory training. Now, we're just going to talk about the memory training exercises today because, hey, they're all very interesting. They're fun. Some of them are a little complicated. We can give you some tips and take some questions. But training your memory involves training your whole brain.
All right, and we are still waiting on a couple of people to go ahead and submit their answers here. So actually, Henry, let me pose a question to you because I know this question is going to come up and want to get ahead of it here.
Sure.
Why are these exercises categorized as memory exercises and other exercises aren't? What's the sort of primary quality that these exercises have?
Well, every exercise in BrainHQ, you know, has some degree of requirement for fast processing or speed training. Of course, every exercise in BrainHQ requires you to pay attention, right? You can't do them unless you pay attention. And frankly, almost every exercise in BrainHQ requires some amount of memory to do the exercise. However, we classified these as memory exercises because they involve speed and they involve attention, but the primary feature that you sort of feel as you're doing the exercises is you feel you're being asked and requiring your memory to work. So, you know, let me give an example. I think most people who've done some BrainHQ have done the Hawkeye exercise where you're looking for birds in your peripheral vision. I mean, that does actually, you know, we classify that as a speed exercise because it gets faster and faster as you do well. But, you know, it does involve your memory, right? You see the birds, they go away. You do have to remember where you saw that bird in order to click it. So is Hawkeye a memory training exercises? Well, a little tiny bit, right? But the main thing that happens is Hawkeye is that it challenges your speed. So in the same way here, the main thing that these exercises challenge, and that's why we call them memory exercises, is, you know, the number of things you can remember, how long you can remember them for, your ability to remember them in the presence of being distracted. So we've classified them as memory training exercises for that reason. But, you know, Stephanie, we still have a lot of debates on the science team about where each of these exercises should belong. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so it looks like the majority of audience members have gone ahead and submitted answers to the poll here. So I'm going to go ahead and end it. I got to keep the webinar moving along here. And let's share the results. Let's see what was the most requested exercise, and we can get started with that first. Da, 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 da. All right, it looks like to-do list training and then memory grid were the top two that were requested as most important for us to demo.
okay.
All right, so let me go ahead and I'll stop sharing the poll results here and I will instead share my
Oh, I'm going to
window.
stop sharing my screen is what I'm going to do. All right. You've already kidnapped it. Good job.
Okay. Okay, so take two. Let's head on down to Scene Crasher, and then we'll pull up the first level here. All right, so a number of keys are going to appear briefly on the screen, and we need to remember their locations. So the keys appear, and then they're static, and then there is an extra key that's been added to the scene, and that's the one that's highlighted here. So that is basically how the exercise is going to work. Henry, do you want to talk about why that static is there to begin with while I start the exercise?
Sure, that's exactly right. So that when you, so we're going to show those keys on the table, and then we show that static, as Stephanie said, and then a new key has appeared. So what are we doing here with this exercise, and why does it help train memory? Well, this is trying to train those earliest parts of what we called immediate memory when I was giving my slides. You see these keys, you can imagine that information flows into the visual part of your brain, and it stays in there, right? Like a little echo briefly. But we show that static because we want to kind of block the after image, right? If you think about when you see something, right? Often if you close your eyes, you have an after image of that image still kind of flowing in from your eye to your brain. And that static helps interrupt that. And it forces the brain to just work with the information that we've given it for a specific period of time. We don't want that kind of visual echo to help you out. We want to train your specific immediate memory by interrupting the flow of information and making your brain work just with what it has available to it.
All right, so we can see that as I'm continuing to get answers right, one of the things that BrainHQ is great at is having all the exercises are adaptive. So as you are getting more and more questions correct, the difficulty of that particular level is going to increase. So whereas at the beginning of this level, I was dealing with, I think, 4 or 5 keys. Now that I've gotten a couple right in a row, there are a lot more keys that I suddenly need to start keeping track of.
That's exactly right. And so this is training your brain's immediate memory in the way that you are given the first image with a certain number of keys, like 5 or 6, although you're operating at a very high level here at this point, Stephanie. You might want to get a few wrong and back it down, and we can talk about it
Yeah.
more. So we're training your brain by asking your brain to first store a certain number of keys in that kind of immediate memory, and then giving it new information where only one thing is different. And so your brain actually almost, you might think of this as having kind of a transparency and overlay, right? Here's one image, and you overlay it with another image, and your brain is kind of looking for, hey, what's the difference between these two images? So it's training the earliest parts of memory, you might say, not working memory, not certainly not long-term memory, but just your ability to compare these two quick experiences that you've had in your visual cortex. So there's 4 of the keys, they go away. And then how are you working on this, Stephanie? How are you kind of noticing, do you feel like, where that extra key has shown up?
Ooh, that's a good question. So generally my approach for this is to kind of have a soft focus near the middle of the screen.
Hmm.
So I am kind of relaxing my eyes. I'm sort of zoning out a little bit. And in the same way that I sort of approach like Hawkeye or other exercises where you're having to deal with many objects, particularly in the periphery, I tend to just sort of notice what's different after the static comes out. That was a bad example because I wasn't paying attention. I'm trying to get this wrong on purpose.
It's hard to talk and do it at the same time. But I agree with
Yeah.
you. When I do this exercise, I tend to put my eyes kind of at the center of the screen and just kind of have a sense of what's the general shape that that the set of keys is making. And then when the new keys come, really I operate purely on instinct. I don't try to bring a lot of logic to it. I just try to be guided by what feels like it's a little bit different or surprising. And quite often that ends up being correct, right? We're not trying to train your declarative memory. We're not trying to train your ability to describe exactly where the keys are. We just train that kind of initial, almost instinctive, almost reactive sense of something here is out of place. Something here is not quite like it was before. You might almost think about this kind of memory as, you come back to your house and you go into your dining room and something's out of place. And you might not even quite realize what it is at first, but then you realize that, oh, maybe someone you lived with has, moved the candlesticks, or, maybe a puzzle you're working with has been moved from one side of the table to the other. It's that instinctive kind of comparison that you do. Do you want to go on to a few other levels to give people a sense of how this changes over time?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea because not every level is going to be these bright green keys on like a nice wooden desktop. Some of these are going to be a little bit more complex. So I guess let's head down to the middle of stage 3 and see what that looks like. Okay. So we are going to be tracking mushrooms on sort of this tan bark or mulch background here.
Yep.
And as I hit start, you guys are going to find that it is a lot more difficult to keep track of these items.
It is a lot more difficult, and that's because this kind of early immediate memory has so much to do with just our sensory perception of the scene. And here, these kinds of reddish, grayish mushrooms, they overlap a lot with that kind of reddish, brownish texture that they're sitting on. So it actually becomes harder for those visual parts of our brain to easily compare what we just saw to what we're just seeing. So we're making the exercise harder here, not just by increasing the number of items you have to store, in this case, the mushrooms, but by challenging just the way your brain perceives and has those mushrooms kind of pop out on the scene versus their background. That is exactly right. So I'm seeing a few questions come up about this exercise, and you can
Yeah,
keep
please.
playing it for a minute and I'm going to take them. Suzanne asks, is it cheating to count the number of keys? Absolutely not, Suzanne. You are welcome to count them. And actually, that works pretty well. At the earlier stages, you might have 4 keys, you might have 5 keys. You can count them. In my mind, I often try to make a little shape out of them. And so I can then notice when the new one appears, does it appear outside the shape? Those are all perfectly great ways to do Scene Crasher. I think that does become challenging. Like where you are now, Stephanie, there's, I don't even know, 9 or 10 mushrooms on
Too
this.
many. Yeah.
So Suzanne, if you're counting those, first of all, good for you. Second of all, that's when I start to rely just a little bit more on a general cloud of the stimuli and a general sense that, hey, this area feels a little bit different. But great question. That is not cheating at all. And someone else asks, hey, I still feel a little bit bad if I'm incorrect on an answer, right? This person says, I'm kind of old school. And in the olden days, an incorrect answer meant we were a bad person. And I just got to tell you, I hear this from time to time, and I always just want to say, please, that is not what we want for someone in BrainHQ. I'm sorry that you had a teacher in the past who told you that you had to get everything right, or if you didn't, you were a bad person. And I get where you're coming from, right? We people were like that at sometimes in older schools. BrainHQ is not like that at all. We are trying to home in on the right level of challenge for your unique brain. And we have hundreds of people on this webinar today, and every one of you has a brain that's at least a little bit different from the person next to you, so to speak. And what that means is that BrainHQ has to kind of calibrate itself, right? It has to give some that you're like, oh, this is easy, I did great. But it also has to give some where you're like, oh, this is really hard, and I'm just kind of guessing. And that's how BrainHQ kind of homes in on the right level of challenge for you. So it's not about getting them right or wrong. It's about letting BrainHQ find that right level of challenge and just keeping pushing your brain on that front. So I hope you just kind of keep at it. And I really don't feel bad when you get one wrong. Think, oh, great, BrainHQ is working. It's finding the right level of challenge for me.
All right. And
Let's
there is a question from Bill that just came in a moment ago that I do want to address. Bill is asking, what's the meaning of the top slider thing that changes as you answer?
Oh,
So up here, this is the progress bar. Sometimes we call it the challenge meter. So the gray circle here is a representation of where we are in the exercise. Each of these vertical lines is what we call a step up, which means that there is a change in stimuli. So as we answer questions correctly, we're going to find that we need to get 2 answers correct here. These arrows will turn green. And then when both of those arrows turn green, this will then go up to the next step and the exercise will become a little bit harder. So in this case, it'll add more mushrooms to the screen for me to try and keep track of. But the opposite is also true. If I get some wrong, it takes one wrong for the exercise to get a little bit easier for me. And that's how sort of the algorithm hones in, like Henry was saying, on where you should be training, like what level of difficulty is right for your brain.
and one thing I want to emphasize is, hey, when you're actually doing the training, like you're looking at the mushrooms and you're clicking where the new one appears, you don't need to worry about what's happening up at the top of the screen, right? That would actually be distracting. But when you are taking a brief breather, once it's done for a moment, you can take a look at the top of the screen and just kind of see where you are. You might kind of go back and forth like that. But you don't need to check it after every single time you do the exercise. You can just look up there from kind of time to time and see how it's going up or down. We're not trying to distract you from the actual brain training. The brain training part is the mushrooms on the screen. All right, Stephanie, with my eye on the clock, do you want to pick another exercise? And we could pick to pick another visual one, and this is a challenging one, so it could be a good idea for us to do it. We could pick mind's eye. That might be a nice one to try.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do mind's eye. So let me go ahead and head on over there. And yeah, let's go to stage one, level one, just to sort of get the tutorial here. So with mind's eye, there's going to be like a shape in the center of the screen, and in that shape, there are going to be dots that move around in this first level. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So there's a circle, and the dots are moving all in the same sort of direction. Now, if we want to see that how those dots are moving again, we can hit play again, and I'll go ahead and do that now. So I actually focus a little bit on that. And for me, it looks like it's going not quite 9-3 across the screen, but pretty close. So that is a little trick that I use to try and remember the direction that these dots are going in. And now we are shown, three different options here. And the third option with those dots kind of going slightly across the screen was the target option that was presented to us at the beginning of this exercise. So that's the correct answer. Let's do another just for a demo here.
Oh, I
Now,
agree. Oh, we'll go ahead.
oh, I was going to say that target is going to be the same throughout the exercise. So you have to remember the direction those dots were going for the entirety of the exercise. So that's what is really going to be probing your memory throughout this exercise. All right, that one looks like it was going up. That one's kind of going down. That one's going side to side. So that would be the third one. All
Okay,
right,
why don't you do a little bit and I'll say a few words about it as you go then.
sure.
So we're training memory here. She's clicked start, and there are the dots, and they're moving almost to the right, maybe a little bit down. Why don't you play it again just to give us a second
Yeah.
look? So we're asking you to store this in memory. You're not going to see this every time. You have to really store it in memory. One more time, let's get it locked in. All right, moving to the right, and I feel like it's going a tiny bit down as it's going to the right. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's click next. Now we're going to see a couple of examples. That one's moving to the right, that one's the right and down, and that one's right and down a lot. So I think of those three, the one that was closest to what we saw at first is the one that we saw first, which is said first. Let's click there.
Yeah. And for those of you eagle-eyed, you may have noticed me putting up a finger. That is actually one of my tricks for when I'm doing an exercise like this, is I always hold up a finger so that way I remember externally which of those options I think is the closest one.
Great. You
So
got it
there we
right.
go.
Now again, we're still remembering what we saw first. It went to the right and down a little bit. And this time I think it was the third one.
I think so too. So let's give that a try. Yeah.
Okay, so again, remember to the right and down a little bit. That's right and down. That's right and down. That's also right and down. So what's happening as it gets harder is we're making the ones that aren't correct, we're making them more similar to what you're looking for. So you can think of this as trying to sharpen your memory. We all remember that what we saw was right and a little bit down, but as this exercise gets harder, the distractors, the things that aren't right, are getting more and more close to what we remembered. And so what we're doing here is we're sharpening your memory in the sense that we don't want you to just say, well, anything that looked like that sounds good to my memory. We want your memory to sort of work so it recognizes precisely what you saw and not something that's almost what you saw.
All right, there we go. Now let's take a look again.
That one's to up, that one's down and to the right, but that one's down and just a little bit right. So I would say third.
Yeah,
Now,
that's
at
what
some
I.
point, if we just get a little confused here, Stephanie, and we might just lose track. What was I looking for in the first place? What happens? Let's go ahead and click the I instructions. And when we
All
do that,
right.
you can click show target and it'll give you a reminder. Hey, this is what you're looking for. Now, you probably don't need to do this every time, but if you find that you've gotten 3 or 4 wrong in a row and you're like, okay, I just don't think I quite remember what I'm looking for here, just click on that information button and click on the show target and it'll give you that reminder. And now I think you can click on X and you can just go back and it'll pick up exactly where it left off.
Yep, and it'll even give you that reminder in the exercise again.
Super. So why don't we pick another level to show how this exercise changes over time?
Sure. All right, let's head back and yeah, let's go to the middle of stage 3. Let me make it difficult on myself. All right, so looking at the target here. Oof. Okay,
So,
this time we have lines in a direction.
right, kind of a smudge and kind of
Yeah.
tilted a little bit up in the right. So let's hit start and see how we do. Okay, we're looking for that
Okay,
smudge, and again, it's tilted a little bit low on the left and high on the right, but not too much. We'll
gonna
look at
do
it
it
one more
again.
time, kind of lock it in. Okay, great.
Okay.
So now let's play the exercise. It's going to show us one smudge, two smudges, three, four smudges. Okay, so we made it a little bit harder. You have to pick not from three this time, but pick four. And again, my recollection is it was tilted a little bit up on the right, but not too much. And so I think it was the first one. What do you think?
I think so too.
Okay, great. Oh, we got it. Good for us. I've played this exercise a lot. There's
Okay.
one that's tilted a lot. That one might be right. That one's not it. That one's too tilted. So I
Yeah,
think it was
I
the
think
second
number
one.
2.
And as I'm saying this, this is how I do this exercise. Each one it shows me, I just try and evaluate. That might be it. Definitely not. Maybe. Definitely not. And it was, I think, the first one because it was only tilted a little bit. And so
Yep.
by me kind of saying that to myself as we do this exercise, that helps me really kind of lock in like exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to take a few more questions while you do a few there, just because we got some
Sure.
questions coming in. Someone, as we're doing these visual memory exercises, Stephanie, Elizabeth asks, hey, I have glaucoma, and since I started BrainHQ, I've lost vision in one eye. Any suggestions to help? So first of all, thanks for sharing that. I'm sorry that's happened to you. My grandmother actually suffered from exactly the same condition. And I have to say that when I went to graduate school in neuroscience, she told me I should probably work on vision because she really wanted some help. But we have a lot more progress to make with glaucoma. That being said, it's perfectly feasible to do these exercises even with vision in just one eye. Now, you might get a few more wrong at first, and BrainHQ might adapt down to make it a little bit easier for you. And that's completely fine. Just like we were talking about with the last question, don't worry about it really if you get some wrong. That's just BrainHQ tracking to your unique brain, right? So if you have glaucoma, you might need the exercises to be a little bit easier. No problem. BrainHQ is going to track down to exactly what your eye and brain can do. So I would definitely recommend continuing to do these exercises, even if you're having some visual difficulties, because they can help your brain, rewire itself to make the most of the vision that you have still in that sense. So thanks. Great question. Great question. And, Gabrielle says, I find that I do better at some exercises when there's less light in the room. And that's kind of interesting. So thanks for sharing that. And maybe that tip will be helpful to some other people. What could be going on is that, your brain is going to find these exercises a little bit easier if there's really high contrast, right? If what you see on your screen is really, the colors are bright and the blacks are black, and in that sense, it really pops out on the screen. And, if you're finding that you have a lot of light in the room, like, I'm sitting in a room next to a window, I have a lot of natural light here. Yeah, on the whole, your screen just might not seem as bright to you, and that might make the exercises a little bit more challenging. So in general, we recommend setting your monitor to make sure it's as bright as it can be. And then if, hey, some of the light in your room is causing glare or distraction, then you can turn the lights down a little bit. I don't necessarily recommend doing BrainHQ in complete darkness. That seems like that might be overkill to me, but you certainly might want to find a lighting level in your room that helps you see the screen really easily. So great question. Elizabeth asks, is there a time limit for each exercise? And the answer is absolutely not. You can take as long, well, with most exercises, and certainly the ones we're showing today, take as long as you like. Like you could wait for a minute here, Stephanie, and you could really like think to yourself, hey, which one did I do,
Yeah.
right? That's totally fine. BrainHQ let you take all the time you like. Now, that being said, with these memory exercises, I think your memory starts to fade a little bit right away. It's probably a good idea to just go ahead and get that answer in, but I don't want you to feel rushed or anything like that. And if you ever need to pause, of course, there's a pause button there in the lower right, and you can just pause the exercise, great news. It'll sit and wait for you as long as you like. And when you resume, it's actually going to start a whole new brain training trial for you. So you don't have to remember what you saw before you paused it. It's just going to give you a new one to start with afterwards.
Mhm.
And then speaking of these visual exercises, Nancy asks, is there any advantage to using a MacBook rather than an iPad? Because maybe the screen's a little bit bigger. Again, first of all, I just think you should use whatever you're most comfortable with. If I'm sitting at a desk, I generally find it most comfortable to use my laptop. But if I'm lying back on the couch, right, it's much more comfortable to use my iPad or even my phone. And again, it might be easier, it might be harder. I really wouldn't worry about that too much. If you're on your phone or your iPad or your Mac, it's going to adapt to the right level of difficulty for you. And if it's a little bit harder on your phone because it's a little bit smaller, no problem. It's going to get a little bit easier for you. And if it's a little bit easier for you because you're working on a big screen, maybe you have a giant iMac or a big screen for your PC, no worries. It's going to get a little harder for you. So just make sure you're working your hardest and your brain HQ is going to push you in the right direction. So use what you feel most comfortable with. If you try brain HQ on your phone and you're like, I don't really like this, it's a little bit too small, no problem. Use your laptop, use your iPad. On the other hand, if you're like me and sometimes you're like, I'm sitting around and instead of using Instagram, right, maybe I should do some brain training. Hey, pull out your phone and do brain HQ on your phone. That's a great way to help out your brain. Let's see. Do you want to show one more different level here?
Sure. That's a great idea. So we were in the middle of stage three. What does the final level in stage three look like? I'm really asking for some trouble here. Let me show the target. Okay, so we're back to the lines, and it seems like there might be a little less contrast than there was previously. Okay. Okay, so I'm like with the lines you'll see me like making hand signs. That is me trying to sort of like visually match, like try and internalize the degree at which those lines are sort of turned. I'll do that one more time. Yeah. Okay. And let's give it a go.
So what's
And this
harder
time,
now is you're going to have to pick from, I think, five of these,
oh
right?
gosh, and it's so fast.
That means there's a lot, and some of them are going to be pretty similar to what you saw. So that's the challenge here. And again, what we're doing is trying to sharpen your memory by giving you ones that are wrong or distracting that are pretty similar to what you're storing in your memory. We're actually training your brain to have kind of a sharper and more precise ability to store a memory. So you know exactly what's right and, know exactly what's not right.
Okay. 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 Three,
I
four.
see a lot of
Okay, I think.
interesting tips coming in. So I see Muriel, I think, talking about this exercise, saying the way they do it is they look at the top of the circle and remember what shows up. And so I think that's
Oh.
that's a nice thought with these, right? You're looking for something that just helps your memory be precise about the details of this, like exactly what angle this smudge is, or exactly what direction those dots are moving, and being able to kind of rehearse that in your mind's eye, as the exercise is called. That's what's going to help sharpen your memory. And then Max says, "Hey, I just used the direction in a clock, right?" So when they see that here, if you go to your eye and let's see that stimulus again
Yeah.
might look at this and say, it's pointed upwards a little bit. It's not really at 3 o'clock. It's maybe more like 2 o'clock. And that might help you kind of lock in your memory of exactly what does this stimulus look like. It's pointing up towards the 2 on a clock. So that's a
Yeah,
good,
I'm thinking like 8:30 to 2:30, like
yeah.
not quite
Good
nine
idea.
to three.
Thanks, Max.
Right. So actually, even though we didn't get to train with the auditory exercises in the memory category, we did fill up that time quite a bit. We've got about 5 minutes left here. So I think if we have, let's take another minute to go through and answer any last minute questions, and then we can actually probably head to the wrap up.
We do have a few questions coming in about the auditory exercises. And again, I'm sorry we had these Zoom problems.
Yeah.
Anyone who would like specific help with an auditory exercise, if you're one of the people who voted for to-do list training or memory grid, I see one or two people here asking about rhythm recall. Hey, again, our apologies that demo didn't quite work today. Just send us a note and we'll organize a little Zoom session for you with one of our brain health coaches. Just say, hey, can you have a brain health coach help me out with this exercise? Just send us that note and we'll set that up. I want everyone who took the time out of their day to come today to get those questions answered. We have wonderful brain health coaches. They'd be delighted to get on a Zoom with you for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes and just walk you through how to do some of those exercises. So again, just send us that note. That sounds
Yeah.
super.
And also in previous webinars, particularly the challenge on webinars, we've gone over exercises like rhythm recall and to-do list training. So we can also direct you towards snippets from those recordings on our YouTube channel. So those are also going to be, if you, for whatever reason, can't schedule a time with the coaches or with our team, we can send you a link to one of those videos so that way you can watch that at your leisure.
Sure. And I think, Stephanie, our next office hours in November is on the most challenging exercises in BrainHQ. I've seen a
That
few
is
people
correct.
ask about Mindbender here with sort of the rock, paper, scissors. We'll definitely be talking about that one, I think, in November. And I see one or two people asking about some of the exercises where you do have to go as fast as possible. And I promise we'll be talking about those exercises in November as well. Great questions.
Yeah. So actually, let's go ahead and pivot to sort of the outro here. Let me share my final screen here. I want to make sure that you all know that our email address is support@brainhq.com. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties today. Please reach out to our customer support team for that information on those questions that you didn't have an opportunity to get answered. You can also, if you address those emails or messages to me, Stephanie, the CD team will forward those to me and then I can answer those and forward you those links to those prior recordings as well if you want to see a replay of those previous demos. So again, I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. This isn't typical. We're definitely going to take a look into it and see how this doesn't happen again in the future. But looking forward to the future, we do have, as Henry said, in November, on November 12th, we have a challenge on webinar where we tackle the most difficult exercises in BrainHQ as voted on by our audience. And I think we can make an exception and sneak in to-do list training and Mindbender for sure, since those were definitely asked for today. And also next month, we have a BrainHQ Academy webinar that Henry is running that I'm very looking forward to. On October 15th, it's called Trick or Cheat, How Magic and Illusions Fool Our Brains. So I'm really, really looking forward to that one. We
That
should
is
be
one of
having
my
a
favorite
magician actually
topics.
join us.
Wonderful.
All right. Like we said, go ahead and reach out to us. We'll provide all of those resources as we can. And also be on the lookout for that invite to the November 12th webinar challenge on where we are going to be demoing exercises for you. And the recording for this webinar should be up on YouTube sometime next week. You can subscribe at youtube.com/brainhq to be notified when that replay goes live. Henry, any final parting words for our audience
No,
today?
thanks everyone for coming. Again, thanks for persevering with us. I hope it was helpful to talk about those exercises. We'll talk about some more in November. And hey, email us if you have further questions. We'd be delighted to take them or set up a coaching session. And with that, happy brain training, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, folks.